Hey, thanks everybody and welcome to this episode of The Real Story. We're here with architects and engineers and great Americans. In this case, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Ray McGovern. And why we're here to find out, well, we'll start with Ray. Why are you here and what brought you here and how did we get blessed to have you here?
Well, Daniel, I'm a retired, although one never retires from being an intelligence analyst. 9/11 is the quintessential analytic challenge. The pieces, as they were put together by the 9/11 Commission, they don't really fit. It smells really bad.
Interesting you say that. I had the same feelings.
Yeah, and not being an architect or an engineer, I'm educating myself here today, but I am an intelligence analyst, and I smell enough bad stuff from all the other things that I know, including a personal interview with former Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta that give me great pause. And I guess my bottom line is that those who are pursuing the answers to these questions, for others to call them conspiracy theorists, or worse still, terrorists, that's unconscionable.
It is, and it's recent too that the major media has now, I've noticed in the past maybe 4 weeks or a month, where all of a sudden, almost like talking points, people in the major media are saying, well, gee, anybody involved, anybody asking a question. And I always go with the strength of in our case, a republic. Everybody likes to think of a democracy, but the strength of our republic is whether or not, gee, can we ask questions?
That's exactly right.
I got to tell you my thing, and then I'll ask you what got you going. And you actually, just so the viewers know, you actually provided the intelligence briefings to our presidents at some point.
I did, yeah. I worked on what they call the President's Daily Brief, the acme of our intelligence process, and I used to brief those one-on-one for 4 years.
Okay, I was a little bit on my past and stuff. I've done a bunch of things, and I'll still do more before I go. But for about a decade, I was involved in building and testing weapon systems in the field for General Dynamics. And needless to say, I had made a lot of things crash and a lot of things burn and all this wonderful stuff. But when the events happened that day, what really bothered me, first off, my viewers already heard my story on it, but what I was going to say is, looking at the Pentagon and all that, I knew from creating crash sites, from crashing planes, I knew how to go through a debris field, okay? We did our own forensics to find out if the equipment worked and did everything it was, so I knew something wasn't right. When I look at these people, when I say look at these people, I came here and I brought the Sharon viewers here so that they could understand that, asking questions is it's not a bad thing, it's an excellent thing, it's things that you should do. I always end my shows asking for, are there any real men in the audience? And for those real men to stand up, because there comes a time in the history of most all societies where you have to do something. But that was me getting windy, I apologize, Ray.
No, let me just make a comment there. You include women in these men, I hope.
Yes, I do.
Because it's been my experience that it's the women that's had all the courage, the guts to lead these movements. Cindy Sheehan, for example, Rachel Corrie, whose name I wear on my wrist, and others who have been inspirational to me. Let me say another word about the questions. The reason I get so angry with people who say don't ask the question, besides being Irish, is because the answers are there. The reason there are so many unanswered questions is because our government won't answer the questions. It's that simple. And so I can't understand, except I do understand, unfortunately, how the corporate-owned media has persuaded our populace to believe that, we have the answers, we have this 571-page report and all that kind of stuff. So I think that there is such a thing as the virtue of anger, as Thomas Aquinas said, and that those of us who aren't angry with this should examine our consciences, because there are times that call for anger directed at finding out the truth, and the truth can be a very dangerous thing, as we all know. That the scripture says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now, what does that mean? That means that if we find out the truth about 9/11, that could be a very dangerous reality, because that would prevent those who would have us not quite free, who would have us not quite free to answer these, to pose these questions, and not quite free to even have a website without having it called a
I noticed that. Not only did I notice them calling, and that's why I say media talking points. The one thing I found interesting, maybe a week or so ago, I listened to, once we'll go with a great woman. When I say great woman, I didn't know much about her, but I got to listen to her for about 20 minutes, Naomi Wolf. And I liked what she said in her research and the way she brought it forth so much that I actually, you know, grabbed it, captured it, made a track on an audio CD, and then I went out on the web and I found her giving maybe a 40-minute talk, and I thought that was so powerful, so good, that I made that track 1 and made the other one track 2, and I've been trying to present these to people until they tell me I'm doing the wrong thing in providing people information that Naomi has found. You're right about the great women thing. They always say, you know, behind a great man, beside a great man, or whatever. Wow.
Well, you know, I learned something just the other day. It's kind of relevant because we have Martin Luther King's birthday coming up. His great speech, I Have a Dream.
Yeah.
If you look at that speech, you'll see that he started out very darkly, explaining what had happened to his people and how there was very, very little reason for hope of any success soon. And you know what happened? Mahalia Jackson was sitting right behind him. And she shouted, "Martin, tell him about the dream."
Okay, yeah.
And she had to do it twice, but you can hear it audibly. "Tell them about the dream, Martin." And he told us about the dream, and it was his most famous speech, of course. So behind alongside every fighter for truth, like these folks we have up here today, these engineers and architects, are people like Cindy Sheehan, people like Rachel Curry, people like Mahalia Jackson, and like down the list, the Code Pink people, you know, have more guts than anybody else.
Exactly, and shows the kind of guts they have.
Yeah.
It's when you would mention Martin Luther King and stuff. I grew up here in America, here in this general area, right around Sharon, where the radio shows, television shows. But knowing he was an important man, knowing that he did good things, but it wasn't until I was older, when I say older, probably 45 or so, that I actually listened to and downloaded every one of his speeches. And at one point, it was my daughter who motivated me to get off my derriere. She's like, "Dad, I'm glad you told me this stuff, but what are you doing about it?" Okay, now this is a college student, and she's smart, you know, smart kid. But after that, you know, anyway, listening to Martin Luther King, the one that really impressed me was, and I believe it was the night before he was assassinated, was he was speaking about how now is not the time to be silent. Mm-hmm. He was speaking against the war, saying, hey, it's not what they're selling you, it's not, you know, what they're telling you and stuff, and now's not the time to be quiet and complacent about it and just go along and don't make ripples. He said there's a time when you have to say something, excuse me, on my lips, but there's a time when you have to stand up.
Exactly right. When he wrote that famous letter from the Birmingham City Jail, it's a masterpiece of American literature. I recommend it to everyone.
Now we got to get it, or
what he said was, you know, it's not so terrible that we have people who wish us ill. What I really resent is the silence of the good people. The ministers and rabbis to whom he was directing this letter. He said, that's the key. It's the abnegation of responsibility. It's the silence of people amid injustice, which Thomas Aquinas and others condemned. They spoke of the virtue of anger, and I think we all need to be more virtuous in this respect and not succumb to what Aquinas called unreasoned patience. And he defined that as, you can imagine what that's like. Look at Germany in the 30s.
Yeah.
But he defined that as saying unreasoned patience sows the seeds of vice, nourishes negligence, and encourages not only evil people, but good people to do evil, whether by commission or by silence. So,
one more time, it nourishes the...
let's see, he said that...
Sows the seeds of
vice, nourishes negligence.
Nourishes negligence.
And encourages not only evil people, but good people to do evil. So, you know, you can make a really good case. And this is what he said. And he was quoting John Chrysostom from the 4th century church. He or she who is not angry when there is just cause for anger sins.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he said, anger respicit the bonum justitiae. Anger looks to the good of justice. And if you can live amid injustice without anger, you are unjust.
Now, I came here, I wrote 3 questions for you, and of course they're left in the car, and I'm working on my mind. One of them was for your contemporaries, what was CIA and stuff, right? If you could, give us an image. If we just closed our eyes and we had no video, what was it like? What were they like?